Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome to this breakfast meeting of Sake Liga in cooperation with the Belgium and Flanders Investment and Trade delegation this morning. Thank you for coming out. It's going to be an extremely interesting session, and I think a session that is well balanced. I'm quite excited about most of us, well, all of our speakers, except for myself. I will bore you with being the master of ceremony. So the program for this morning, just for all your benefit, is that we will do a quick introductory talk by myself now, and then followed by His Excellency Didier, the ambassador to South Africa from Belgium. So that should take us no more than 5 or 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Then we're going to be serving breakfast, and the formal presentations will start at around 9. I'm sure everybody has availed themselves of the amenities and all of that, so I'm not going to go into that boring detail. And so what I will do is, before every speaker, I will give a thorough introduction to that speaker for the session. Some opening remarks from my side. We are... Just by introduction of myself, I am a director at Sake Liga. I've been with the organization for about 7 years. Sake Liga, as you know, is doing phenomenal work across the spectrum in establishing businesses in our country. And effectively living up to that very simple tagline, which is saying that the economy is our responsibility. It really is. And the best way to put that is to say that the economy is really what entrepreneurship is about. You see, when you look at the Liga, as you know, is doing phenomenal work across the spectrum. Yes, that's me. I've never been quoted that quickly after, you know, and I didn't think that was profound. So anyway, the economy really is the responsibility of the entrepreneur. You see, the classical definition of entrepreneurship is that the entrepreneur is the custodian of the capital structure. You take the entrepreneur out, you lose a lot. You lose a lot. And at Sake Liga, we've taken that responsibility and we've said, how can we do more business with less political influence? And that's what we're about. So please support us. You'll see us doing some really interesting things. I have with us today is Piet Leroux. He is our Chief Executive Officer, and Piet is building a formidable team, and you will see a lot more of us in the very near future. We are building an organization that is going from strength to strength. Not enough about Sake Liga, I also have another hat. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Andile Solutions. Andile is operating in about 9 different countries in Africa, so I have a very real business footprint on the continent. But also, and specifically looking at the topic for today, Andile has recently decided to move our head office to the European Union. And there are specific reasons why we've decided to do that. And so maybe just some opening remarks. The promise of Africa is it's the same everywhere. We hear things that Africa is has this amazing agricultural potential. Africa is digitally native. It has a growing population, 5 babies per mother, 6 babies per mother, 6% growth in East Africa. We hear all these statistics and we are excited about it as business people. But the risks in Africa are very real. If you've ever done business there and here, the risks in Africa is real. And therefore, as business people, the lack of organization that we see on the continent and here, we are seeing a lack of structure. And that structure plays out in a lack of regulation. I don't like regulation at all, but I think light regulation, does give everyone comfort that there's an even playing field. And if you look, for instance, at the banking industry, which is my customer segment, we're seeing only 2 countries in Africa having conformed to the Basel III standard, a standard that's been in play in the rest of the world for 5 years. That is a ticket to play. Africa simply does not care to implement a very simple standard. we look at these statistics and we should look at them with suspicion. Because what we really should be looking at when we judge any economy is behavior. How are people behaving? And so the lack of true democracies in Africa is obviously worrying. We are not, what does that mean? It means that people are not behaving in a way that says we will self-organize, get the best result. Okay? And so Africa has these challenges. And in the midst of these challenges, entrepreneurs rise up and do good business. Entrepreneurs like us rise up and face those challenges and are entrepreneurial. We protect the capital structure, critical function. And I would like to remind you and myself that as business people, that is the critical function. We have to continue doing that. But still, why then the European Union? Why then do we have a conference like this where we say, well, what should you consider in a move like that? And the reason is quite simple. The European Union gives us access to more markets. The European Union has their own challenges. Because of the fact that their population growth is inhibited, skill shortage is very, very real. And that gives us opportunities. But more importantly, and you'll see in the balanced approach to the talk today, that the European Union also gives us protection. Something that is very important. You see, with the digitization of the economy, with the digitization and the digitalization of supply chain, intellectual property is, in any business, probably your most valuable asset. And if that cannot be proven to be protected, but also built, then business cannot flourish. And so what are the problems in South Africa with intellectual property? Clearly, exchange control has to stop, because we cannot be investing in a capital structure that is immovable. How can exchange happen if there's super growth in a capital structure and that capital structure is stuck? It's the worst regulation possible for free trade in the new economy. Secondly, and this is maybe the elephant in the room, but property rights under this government is highly suspicious. Everybody is worried about expropriation without compensation. If you read the amendments, it is a hop, skip, and a jump before we get to intellectual property. So if a government does that, well, what will the protectors of capital do? They will move their capital. And so this government needs to learn a lesson that we cannot make judgments like that on our business community, because we will do what is right for our constituents, as they do. Am I speaking directly here this morning? This is the reason why we're looking at the European Union, isn't it? It's that simple. Grants, tax breaks, these things fuel innovation. You know, we're sitting with a 28% corporate tax rate across the board. You go into, and we will see some of the benefits available, to develop, in other words, to get into a position where we can build more. You need help, because it's very expensive to build technology, as we know. And so these things are important for us to take. But let me leave you with this thought. Europe also has its challenges. To walk into Europe is not easy. And as entrepreneurs, you need to understand that. What am I saying? I'm telling you, if you lose your core principles, if you lose your core value proposition, and you walk into Europe, you will be taken out. Do not think of Europe as this place where everything just works and it's wonderful. It is an extremely competitive market. It is a market where if you don't know what you're about, you will lose out. My view, take the best from Europe, keep your intellectual struggle, keep your value proposition, keep the core of your belief right here, and bring the best of both worlds together. This is where the growth is, that is where the protection is. Marry the two for successful business. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand over now to His Excellency Didier van der Hasselt, the ambassador of Belgium. Didier just told us that this is his final year as ambassador, so I'm sure he's going to leave us with a few very inspiring thoughts. Didier, over to you. whilst he's coming up, Didier, His Excellency, has been the ambassador to Belgium, South Africa. He's based in Pretoria with a jurisdiction over Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Eswatini, and Lesotho since 2018. Before he was spokesperson, head of communications and PR for Minister Reinders, Foreign Secretary of Belgium. He was posted before in Sao Paulo, Brazil, Beijing in China, and the EU. He has a diplomatic career of over 23 years. Welcome, Didier.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Good morning, Mr. Leroux, Mr. Brink. Thank you for having us. Good morning, Luc, from Flanders Investment and Trade. Real pleasure being here. I'm indeed just started my 4th year, so I'm doing my honors, like you say, I think. And I'm, of course, very, very busy with my bucket list. Not only the private one, because there's so much to see here, but also the professional one. We were talking about it. And that bucket list includes getting businesses to Belgium, to Flanders. So real pleasure being here today. In front of an IT audience. I'm not an IT guy. I mean, IT, I always associated with problems with getting stuck somewhere in the computer, but I wish I would have these skills. But when it comes to IT skills in South Africa, I cannot start without just mentioning our flagship in South Africa, and I suppose many of you know it. It's the Belgian IT University, the Belgian campus, which is a privately run tertiary academic institution with based here in north of Pretoria, with a campus in Port Elizabeth and also in Joburg, providing the South African IT labor market with 8 to 9% of the needs every year. So 100% of the graduates of the Belgian campus here in South Africa find their way into the labor market immediately, thanks to their model of operating. They work with the private sector. The Dimension Data is one of them, I think. They work with the most prestigious universities in the world. They have an agreement with Penn State. They have an agreement with the KU Leuven and the University of Antwerp in Belgium, which benchmark every 5 years the whole curriculum. So that's my first point for you as an IT public. If you need staff, you might look at Belgian campus, or you already have done so. But more general, what I wanted to say today is that we have strong economic ties, South Africa and Belgium. In 2017, according to the South African Reserve Bank, Belgium was ranked the 6th in the world in terms of foreign direct investment in South Africa. And at last year's presidential investment conference, our Belgian companies together pledged an additional 1.5 billion rand to be invested in the near future. And at least 1/3 of these pledges have been implemented. So our businesses are here. We have between 80 and 100 companies active, and they are here to stay. In the other direction, by March 2020, South Africa had invested about 1.8 billion rand in Belgium. And so we sincerely hope that today might be the kickoff of some new South African projects in Belgium. Why? Mr. Brink already has alluded to a number of reasons why you should look at the European Union and Flanders, Belgium in particular. Why establish yourself with a branch in Belgium. First of all, Belgium offers a fast and secure, reliable IT infrastructure, providing the ideal backbone for the operations of any company. Broadband, fiber optic, internet, and secure service are widely available, providing secure cloud solutions and collaborative computing. Almost all households are covered by fixed networks capable of providing services of 30 megabits per second, so 99% since 2019. And 4G coverage has reached 100% of the households already in 2019. In the EU Commission 2019 Digital Economy and Society Index, which is kind of a study that is done every year, Belgium ranks 9th. According to that same index, Belgium scores very well and is clear above the EU average on integrating technology into the activities of businesses. And when it comes to electronic information sharing, Belgium maintains its position as the best performing EU member state. The OECD ranks us highly in terms of incentives for companies to invest in innovation, and I suppose Luc will go more into detail. We have attractive corporate tax incentives, employment-related incentives, and direct subsidies, and as a result, many innovative companies have their operation in Belgium. If you think your company is too small to enter the international market or to enter Belgium, think again. There is no business too small for the Belgian market. SMEs and family businesses are the engine of our economy. We have more than 1 million SMEs. Many of them come from modest beginnings, and we know how to help them thrive. This is very important, I think, because this is a fundamental difference with the South African economy, where you have much more, the South African economy is much more based on big players, and the SME fabric is less important. In Belgium, SME fabric is the base of our economy. And an SME in Belgium doesn't mean that you don't have international activities. We have many SMEs active here. SMEs, they start small, they become medium, and sometimes they become really big. We are not serving our flagship breakfast cookies from the Lotus Group, but the Lotus Group, for example, is one of these examples. The family business that has become a global player. Same for our brewers, AB InBev. It started as a family business. So for small companies, it's easy. It's much easier to connect and to come into a market where you have smaller clients. I mean, it's easier to get an SME as a client than AB InBev or a big bank. So quite important to know. SMEs include also startups, and in Belgium, startups have the highest success rate in the European Union. 2/3 of the startup companies survive longer than the crucial first 5 years. And so today you will hear how you can become part of one of these statistics. When you invest in Belgium, and Mr. Brink also has alluded to it, you invest in the heart of Europe, literally and figuratively. Belgium is the place to be when it comes to starting a business with a European focus, with affordable connections to major commercial and industrial locations such as London, 2 hours, 17 minutes by train, Paris, 1 hour by train, Amsterdam, 2 hours by train, and Frankfurt, 3.5 hours by train. Also nice to know for the weekends, by the way. Brussels has also the most important European institutions, as you know, European Commission, European Parliament, European Council, professional federations, corporate headquarters, and representatives of some 200 regions and cities, bringing you close to the important decision makers and networks and making it, yes, once again, a prime location for your business. Our market is also kind of a laboratory for foreign companies to test products. Multinationals such as H&M and Coca-Cola test their products in Belgium for the European market. You know, in the north we speak Dutch, in the south we speak French. So we're at the crossings of the two cultures, the Nordic serious culture and the Latin culture in the south. They come together in Belgium. And so you have like a very very interesting laboratory for testing products. We boast testing facilities and strategic pilot plans, R&D centers to help a range of industries to test and scale up their innovation. 60% of Europe's purchasing power and 50% of Europe's population is within a 500-kilometer radius. So it's really a very central location where you cover one of the most rich markets in the world. So today, a number of experts, you will hear a number of experts, a number of testimonials. From my side, I would like to say that our Belgian network in South Africa here jointly fit the embassy, consular services. We will try to do our utmost to roll out the red carpet for you. And I hope it will be a very interesting morning. And of course, we're more than happy to take a number of your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Just a note to everyone here. My firm uses the Belgium campus. We recruit from there quite extensively, and our experience has been phenomenal. So really something that I can recommend to get in contact with the Belgium campus. They are just on the outskirts of Pretoria. We will now move to breakfast, so it will be served. Just a note before we go, there's one change in the program, and that is that we will move the IP regulation in South Africa session first. It will be a virtual session, and I will give some context to that just now. Thank you. Ladies and gen- sure. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to give us another 5 or so more minutes to finish breakfast. I'm going to run a tight ship, so there you go. Stop talking and get on with it, will you? We've got quite a full program, so enjoy your breakfast. But yeah, we're going to be starting in about 5 more minutes. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to move to our first guest speaker this morning. A really fascinating topic for any of you who has dealt with intellectual property law and the effects of South African business specifically would know that it really is a complex matter and a very, very important topic. So our first speaker is from Wentzel, and as you know, Wentzel has certainly one of our leading law firms in our country. We've had a change in who will be presenting. So Carla Colette is not with us this morning, but she will be joining in through Zoom. And just a brief introduction to Carla. She's an intellectual property specialist. She has considerable expertise in intellectual property, specifically relating to technology, entertainment law, and she has a strong focus on commercial transactions and dispute resolution. Very important thing to do as far as intellectual property is always concerned, in patents and so forth. She has extensive experience in advising clients in relation to all services associated with IP locally and internationally, particularly on the African continent. She advises on market-leading and complex corporate transactions involving IP, data, and technology assets of all kinds, cross-border intellectual property structuring, take note, exploitation and monetization, IP issues flowing from acquisitions and disposals, public offerings and corporate reorganizations, IP exchange control issues, and IP due diligence investigations. Carla is a member of the South African Institute of Intellectual Property Law and a member of the International Trademark Association. So without further ado, Carla, who is going to join us just now on that screen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Apologies for not being able to be there in person, but I hope this will still be an interesting presentation for you. So as was mentioned, I'm going to be speaking on IP structuring and the commercialization of intellectual property rights. Luke, you could please move to the next slide. Right, so IP structuring can be quite a complex issue, and it's very much related to the objectives that a business is trying to reach commercially. And those considerations can sometimes be constrained by how the IP that you have as a business was initially developed. And this is obviously set in the context of a South African business developing IP in South Africa as the starting point. And because there are so many different considerations to take into account when you are structuring a business that is IP heavy, very much like a tech business, it's incredibly important to do this right in the beginning before you even start developing the IP. As I go through this presentation, you'll see that where the IP is developed and how it is you ultimately commercialize it has major implications for where you can own the IP and what regulatory type approvals are required if it is that you want to externalize your IP to a country outside of South Africa. So, as I have said, these considerations apply to any business that is IP heavy, but it's also especially true of a software or tech type business because of the nature of the intellectual property rights that you would have. So the initial commercialization considerations are things like identifying your business model or your strategy. So by this, I mean, is the goal to sell licenses only in South Africa, or is the goal to sell licenses across anywhere in the world, really, but from South Africa? Is it to sell your software as a service? Is it a reseller model? There are many other options that you could elect to commercialize your business. And part and parcel of that consideration is deciding whether you would use an entity in South Africa to service the African market, and then whether you would incorporate another entity to service, let's say, the United States, Europe, or Australia, for example. So that is something that you should be clear about, at least initially, and have some kind of framework that you want to work with, because these considerations now in the beginning are important for when we deal with the exchange control aspects, which I'll be speaking to towards the end. So the other major consideration is to identify the intellectual property and what kind of protection is required. So I'm going to work off of the assumption that intellectual property is a gray area for most people. So what I want to start by saying is that identifying what intellectual property you have can sometimes be quite difficult, especially in the context of a tech company. The main body of intellectual property rights that you would be dealing with are copyrights and know-how. And then the types of copyrights are specifically computer programs and then literary and artistic works. There are, of course, others. For example, the trademark or brand under which you would operate, trade secrets possibly. There could be database rights, for example. And it's really important to consider what those intellectual property rights and assets are. And the reason it is so important is because you need to understand how those rights should be protected right up front. You don't ever really want to leave this kind of step out and do it towards the end after things have already happened, already been developed to such an extent that it ends up counting against you in a way. So identifying the nature of the intellectual property rights that you as a business have is essential. Another consideration is to identify who will develop and create the intellectual property rights and where. So intellectual property rights across the world are typically territorial, but because we live in this sort of global economy, this principle is becoming more and more fluid. So even though territorial intellectual property rights are territorial, there are steps that you can take to protect your intellectual property in various jurisdictions. Importantly, there's also several international treaties which would cover or give you protection in countries outside of South Africa if it is that you created your intellectual property rights in South Africa. So a good example of that relates to copyright, which tech companies would have a lot of. And that's under the Berne Convention. So all member states that are Berne Convention states, which would include Belgium, for example, will then be offered the treatment that's called national treatment. It's a principle that essentially means that if your IP is developed in South Africa, it would be treated in Belgium as if it had the same types of intellectual property protection. So your copyright would also subsist there by operation of law. So where someone develops the intellectual property is crucial. If the IP is generated in South Africa under the direction and control of a South African business or entity, that intellectual property would be considered South African intellectual property. And it's really, really important because you can't escape that principle if, for example, you're a South African entity operating in South Africa with your effective management being in South Africa, and then let's say commissioning a developer in Estonia or Istanbul to develop some type of unique software code for you, that under that services arrangement, even though the person is sitting in a different country, the way that copyright works, particularly in relation to computer programs, means that the intellectual property will be owned by the entity that exercises control over the making of that software. So if you're the South African entity, by operation of law, where you commission somebody that sits outside of South Africa, that IP will still vest in you. But really importantly, you should enter into contractual relationships governing that kind of development. You always want, wherever your employees or third-party developers, wherever they sit, you would want to procure the assignment of those rights to the extent that they don't automatically transfer to you by operation of law. And this is so that when it is that you commercialize your IP, you actually own all of the rights which you are now trying to leverage. I often see it where entities, they use third-party developers and so on and don't enter into appropriate contractual relationships. And what ends up happening is that only a certain body of the intellectual property rights that they own transfer to them by operation of law. And then when it comes to wanting to enforce your rights later down the line against a third-party infringer or some or other contractual breach, you don't actually own all the rights to your software or to your IP offering, whatever it may be, which makes enforcing it almost impossible. So that's a really important consideration that needs to be taken into account. To be honest, this is such a dense and complex area that we could probably do a full day workshop just on identifying what IP you have and the implications of who and where the IP is developed. That I'm just keeping this kind of conversation high level so that we can focus on the IP structuring elements. But please remember the importance of these principles when it comes to the IP exchange control aspects that we speak about just now. Another one of the initial considerations that's very, very important is obviously who will own the intellectual property rights. And that's for the reasons that I've just explained. You need to own the rights to commercialize them. And that's not just in South Africa, it's to commercialize them anyway. So that is fundamental. Again, identifying which territories you would want to commercialize your IP in is important, because there's steps that you can take to, in some instances, register intellectual property rights in the various territories to protect yourself from third-party infringement, for example. And then from the South African context, what is incredibly important to bear in mind is that where the IP is South African IP, so developed and owned by a South African entity, where a South African entity wants to exploit its intellectual property by licensing it or selling it or hypothecating it, so for example, using it as security for a loan, but that involves some kind of offshoring element. The biggest red flag that should be going off in all of your minds is exchange control regulations. And I will discuss that in detail later in this presentation. But yes, so those at a high level are the initial commercialization considerations that are important for any business, but especially a tech business. Luke, please can we move to the next slide? So just to explain briefly the various IP commercialization strategies that can be adopted. Again, this applies to any business, but it's particularly pertinent for tech companies, whether you're a startup, a scale-up, or a well-established business. Ultimately, the way that technology is exploited generally is kind of the same. So either intellectual property rights are sold or signed from a South African entity offshore, or they are licensed. Another major option is partnerships and joint ventures, and that's also incredibly important, as well as the reseller or distribution model when you're entering into new markets. What is fundamentally important there from an IP point of view, in addition to whatever exchange control regulations may apply, entering into contractual relationships with whoever you do business with cross-border is incredibly important. Not just from a commercial point of view and how you run your business, but also from an enforcement point of view down the line if things go south. So that's something that should also be considered. The other type of commercialization strategy is, as I mentioned earlier, is where you leverage your intellectual property as security for finance or for a loan. And this is typically how we see people use intellectual property to monetize their businesses. Okay, so these two slides are intended to just be almost an IP 101 crash course in recognizing how diverse the body of intellectual property rights are that any business could potentially have, and then the fundamentals around what any business should be thinking about, which is, how am I going to exploit my IP? Who's going to own, who's going to develop the IP, who's going to own the IP, where are we going to essentially commercialize our IP, and what does that mean from a regulatory point of view? We can move to the next slide, please. So here we come to the IP exchange control considerations, and it's such a double-edged sword, because the IP exchange control regulations are a body of regulations that have been developed by the South African Reserve Bank, and the genesis of this is essentially to try and keep value or retain value in South Africa. Where this kind of stemmed from initially was that South African businesses who have owned and developed historically incredibly valuable IP of all kinds started draining value from their South African businesses, for example, by selling or licensing their valuable IP for, let's say, R1 to their related entity in an offshore jurisdiction. And that's obviously from a revenue point of view, it made sense at the time, but the Reserve Bank did not take kindly to this, because ultimately what would happen is the IP would be developed here, value would be stripped from the South African business, put into an offshore entity, and all revenue was then generated there. And ultimately the South African economy becomes the net loser. So what happened over time is that the Reserve Bank issued the exchange control regulations. I just also want to point out that the exchange control regulations deal with a host of different issues, dealing with the outward flow of funds, but we are only focusing on the IP aspects for today. So what the exchange control regulations basically do is, now they've even become more relaxed, but in the past, what they essentially tried to do was to preclude South African businesses from selling, licensing, or otherwise encumbering their IP rights in favor of an offshore entity. So Wentzel has actually been involved very heavily with the South African Reserve Bank in trying to lobby to relax the exchange control regulations for all businesses, but particularly in relation to tech businesses. There have been some relaxations of these regulations over time, but ultimately they're never going to go away. It's still in the South African economy's interest to keep IP here, but the framework is starting to take a model that makes more sense. And while there's still a lot of improvement that can be made to the regulations, understanding what the various implications are is important, because the regulations are no longer an outward blocker to a South African business moving their IP or externalizing their IP outside of South Africa, provided that you operate or work within the parameters set out in the exchange control regulations. Right. So in this table, it's a more granular look at how the exchange control regulations work from an IP point of view, but I will just voice over for you the general principles. So the general principle is that any outward licensing or sale or transfer or encumbrance of intellectual property assets or a right in IP assets from a South African resident entity to a related or unrelated entity in a foreign jurisdiction typically requires approval from the South African Reserve Bank or its authorized dealer. That would generally be the authorized dealers, typically any one of the South African banks. So the principle is that any transaction involving IP must be fair, arm's length, and for market-related consideration. And then importantly, what we need to remember is that to show that, to demonstrate that contracts are fair, arm's length, and market-related, or sales or licenses of IP, to demonstrate that they are arm's length, fair, and market-related, you would typically, in the sale context or the assignment or transfer context, need to show an IP valuation of some kind. And in the licensing context, you would need to have a transfer pricing study or analysis done to show that the royalties that are flowing are, as I've explained, fair, arm's length, and what would be considered market-related for the nature of the technology that has been developed. So to look at it in a more granular detail, you'll see that on the left-hand side, you have the offshore transfer of IP. This includes outright sales and transfers. And where you contract with an unrelated non-resident entity, that is arm's length, fair, and market-related, you will only require the approval of the authorized dealer. So what that means is that although you still require approval, it's a relatively smooth process, and it's a matter of making an application, which is typically approved. If that deal is not arm's length, fair, and market related, there has to be some unbelievably good reason for that, and application needs to be made to the Financial Surveillance Department or to the FinServ for its approval. And generally, that type of transaction would not be approved by the Reserve Bank. Again, if we're doing a South African resident entity to a related non-resident entity, so in other words, an intra-group type of relationship, whether it's arm's length, fair and market related or not, that approval would need to be sought by the FinServ. Very importantly, the Reserve Bank will absolutely never approve an intra-group transaction that is not arm's length, fair and market related, because that would demonstrate the initial example that I had provided of a South African entity essentially selling its IP for less than market value to its own group entity, which, you know, I have never actually seen approval being granted for that kind of a transaction. Then when we deal with the outward licensing, the considerations are similar. So where you go from a South African resident entity to an unrelated non-resident, so an unrelated third party, and where you're paying, where the contractual relationship is arm's length, fair and market related, you only need authorized dealer approval. And that applies also where you're dealing with a South African resident that's contracting with a related non-resident entity. So in other words, an intra-group license only requires authorized dealer approval where it is fair, arm's length and market related. And again, just as in the offshoring option where you're selling IP offshore to a related or non-related entity that is not fair, arm's length and market related, you would require FinServ approval, which again is very difficult to obtain. So this body of regulations from an investment point of view causes a lot of consternation. And I've seen several deals fall over, particularly in the context of tech startup and scale-up companies, where they are trying to raise capital from VC funders. Typically, VC funders want your South African IP to be owned offshore. And of course, the South African entity would then propose registering an entity offshore and then mirroring the shareholding in that entity or in some way being involved. So in other words, creating an intra-group structure. Historically, that intra-group or loop structure was not permissible at all. And any transfer of IP in that context was refused by the South African Reserve Bank. Then Wentzel lobbied, and what happened is they relaxed the loop restriction to a 40% shareholding. So that was also from an investment point of view an enormous issue. I don't know any IP heavy business, like a tech business, that would agree to only holding 40% or less shareholding in an entity that's going to own its IP offshore. And of course, you know, so they relaxed that restriction, but it was still not a commercially viable option. So I'm very pleased to tell you that after further lobbying, the position is now that loop structures are permissible subject to tax treatment. But now where an entity sets up, or South African entity sets up another entity offshore, and whether it's related or unrelated, you can sell or license your IP to that entity to commercialize it offshore. But the major caveat to remember is that the Reserve Bank will approve that kind of a transaction, but will never approve a transaction where, let's say, the South African entity sells the IP to an offshore entity, but then licenses it back to the South African entity to commercialize it in South Africa, because that would require outward flows of South African royalties. So the Reserve Bank would never approve that kind of a scenario. So all of these kinds of considerations are important. And this takes me back to the very first slide where I explained what countries you're going to operate in, how it is you want to commercialize your IP. Is it through sale? Is it through licensing? Where would it be held? Where is your IP developed? That is why all of these considerations are so fundamentally important. If it is that you're 5 years down the line into the development of your IP, there is no argument that your IP is South African IP and it's held here in South Africa. So, you know, when you are at that stage and then wanting to move your IP out, the only option you have really is to do it within the bounds of the exchange control regulations. The other option is, of course, to, at the very conception of a business, to consider whether, if you want your IP offshore, can it be developed entirely offshore? Can the business that you would have set up in South Africa actually be incorporated in another jurisdiction? And all development happen in that other jurisdiction. But the major concern and red flag that I need to point out to you in that context is that from an effective management and tax point of view, the South Africans involved in that business need to be living in that offshore jurisdiction. Effective management and control cannot occur from South Africa for an entity that has been set up in a different jurisdiction. So all of these are quite interlinked and interrelated considerations, but they are very important to sort of have some kind of steer on right up front when you're busy developing your business and growing what it is that you're wanting to do, so that down the line you don't run into difficulties, particularly if it is that you want to do some kind of funding raise and get venture capitalists involved and so on. But as I've said, it's not impossible to get it done. The Reserve Bank is slowly starting to see that the exchange control regulations are quite restrictive. So we are definitely moving in the right direction. Can I please move to the next slide, Luke? Thank you. So just to point out, the effect of non-compliance with the exchange control regulations is that although the transaction will not be void by reason of the non-compliance, so any license or sale would still be effective for legal purposes, failure to comply with the exchange control regulations can accrue criminal and administrative penalties, and of course, enormous reputational harm. So it is very important to make sure that before you do any sale or license transaction that involves your intellectual property, that you apply to the Reserve Bank in advance. It is actually what the exchange control regulations require. The Financial Surveillance Department of the Reserve Bank, so the FinServ, has very wide powers of enforcement. And in most instances where there has been historic non-compliance with the exchange control regulations, we can't actually track what penalties have been administered, because a lot of them are done under confidentiality restrictions. So that's also important to note. The general principle is that the penalty will be between 40 to 60% of the value of each licensing transaction. So if it is that you license your IP from South Africa, let's say to 10 different countries, each instance of licensing would be an element or a new instance of non-compliance. So as you can see, the penalties can stack up pretty quickly. Please, can we move to the next slide? So this is my final slide, and it's just to show you what a vanilla type investment structure would look like. And this essentially takes into account what used to be the prohibited loop, but has now become a permissible loop structure. And it's where the South African resident obviously holds into its SA co and also holds into its hold co. And in this context, you need to try and understand how it is you want to commercialize your intellectual property. Is it by way of sale? Is it by way of licensing? Or is it the alternative? Do you not incorporate your entity in South Africa and start your IP development in South Africa, but do so from a foreign jurisdiction where these specific requirements don't apply? In my experience, it's often not a realistic option, the second one, if the South African individuals involved are not actually relocating to the foreign jurisdiction, because as I've explained, it sort of goes into the realm of a major tax and effective management issue. But as a general principle, if you're a South African tech business, this is a typical structure that you can use to commercialize your IP in foreign jurisdictions. I see that I think I have about 1 or 2 minutes left. If anybody has any questions they would like to pose, or otherwise my presentation is complete.
proceedings. Just a comment from my side. Just thank you to Wentzel. I think that many of us have struggled with the loop structure, and that lobbying is really, really critical work that they've done on our behalf. So thank you to that, Carla, you and your team at Wentzel. And just a comment from my side as someone who's really had to delve through all the implications of this. A quick note that the exchange control legislation on intellectual property movement is really fair. I think that the way Carla explained it was very much in depth. So yes, it is onerous and it takes a lot of planning. And so what worked for us, and Niels there is a real expert as well, but what worked for us was two things. Really, to start with the end in mind. You need to be exactly clear what you want to achieve. If you're not, there are so many things to consider. The rabbit hole just gets very big on you. So start with the end in mind, and specifically because this is where it bites you. Start with where you will be accruing your wealth based on where you'll be getting the tax breaks and where you'll be getting the grants to develop that intellectual property further. Start with that in mind. But clearly, Wentzel is very much a fay of all of these issues, and so do not underestimate this issue. It really is a legal quagmire, but one that clearly our guest has shown that they know how to deal with. Our next speaker is going to be speaking to us on a very important topic, doing business in Africa in comparison with Europe. And that just absolutely has my palate watering. And if I can just find his resume, Werner Kapp is the CEO of Dimension Data, and he started in the IT industry in the mid-90s. Now, Werner, I don't think we should put that on our CVs, because that was in a previous industrial age. So, nothing like experience, right? He joined Dimension Data in 2000, and its services division was responsible for the Eastern Cape, Western Cape, Gauteng business, respectively. Isn't that wonderful to see how people can grow out of South Africa, applying the lessons that we learn on a micro level, and then reach for the stars? Nevertheless, achieving significant client experience, revenue, and people growth during his tenure in these roles. Everybody who runs a business knows that those are the important things. Clients, people, and growth. No place to learn that like...
Right. In 2015, he was appointed as COO.
DD Middle East and Africa with accountability for all business operations in Southern Africa, East Africa, and Middle East. He has law degree from the Nelson Mandela University in Port Elizabeth, a master's in MBL from UNISA, and he's completed the NTT Global Leadership Development Program at the IMD in Lausanne, Switzerland. He's passionate about what technology can achieve for economic and social growth, and loves the daily challenge of engaging clients and employees on diverse cultures across the continent. He's married to Claudette. They have 2 daughters and a son. In his spare time, he enjoys running. Yeah, I don't know. Until there, he had me, but the running thing, who does that? Please welcome Werner Kapp.
Department after that intro. Ooh, I'm ahead of my time, yeah. No stress. Thank you very much, everybody. Nice to meet you. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I don't know if Carla is still on the line. I think it's her ex-husband. I'm going to fire because Dan Collett is our head of marketing. I think he wrote that resume. So yeah, firstly, thank you for the opportunity. Just a time check. You said I've got 2.5 hours. Okay, so that's good. I should finish. Oh, you got the deck back. I'm not going to slavishly stick to the deck because it's probably a little bit too much marketing collateral. In terms of my role, so firstly, just a little bit of just to contextualize what Dimension Data does and our company, we actually owned by NTT, which is Nippon Telegram and Telecommunications, which is essentially the telco of Japan. It's a company the scale of which, for a guy from Kariga, as it's known these days, Usenik, the scale of that company boggles my mind sometimes. It employs about 300,000 people globally. Its turnover is about $125 billion. They bought us in 2010. Essentially, we are a wholly owned subsidiary, so we're the IT services arm of the company. So if you think in South African context, companies like BCX being bought by Telkom, obviously, as as Andries said, I'm a veteran. I still remember using Windows 95. Shouldn't say that out loud. And as technology has converged, you've seen a lot of telco companies buy IT services companies globally. So I'm privileged enough to serve on it's actually called NTT Limited. We've retained the Dimension Data brand in Africa, and particularly South Africa, because it's a very strong brand. The company was actually founded here 41 years ago. But I have the privilege of serving on the NTT Global Exco. Our headquarters are now based in London. So it's very, very nice to get a view of the African continent, Middle East, and also dealing with a lot of my colleagues. In fact, I had a call yesterday with one of our colleagues in Germany, because we doing some work for a South African customer based in Germany. So just a little bit about Dimension Data itself. We employ about 12,000 people. We are in 13 countries, and as the intro said, largely the biggest business hubs for us really is South Africa, East Africa, Kenya in particular, and the Middle East. And our biggest business in the Middle East is the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, where I was actually at last week. So I had my first international trip last week, and I spent some time in Dubai and in Riyadh. Sorry, it's a bit rude turning my back to you. Normally I have one of those screens in front. So just a little bit, I don't want to do and I'll relate this to Africa now. And I think it was you in your intro, you mentioned the comment about Africa being digitally native, or was it yourself, Didier? I can't remember. And I want to come back to that point, because it's a very, very important point. So, I mean, briefly speaking, what we do, and this buzzword, and my understanding is most people are here in tech, so I don't have to teach you about digital transformation, but kind of our view on digital transformation, because we found that it is such a buzzword. We're trying to unpack it for ourselves and our clients, and it really is the way that you collect data, the way that you engage with your customers, the way that you engage with your employees, and the way that you run your business, right? Be it your supply chain, be it your finances, and so forth and so forth. We all know that the way we engage our customers and the way our service providers are starting to engage with us is different, right? You talk about working in IT in the mid-90s. My kids, if you can't touch it, if you can't tap on it, they don't understand what it is. We were on holiday in the Eastern Cape recently during school holidays, and we went to go visit old friends of ours, and they had a TV, but the old TVs, not the plastic TVs. And my son, who's 6 years old, he asked me what that is. So things really change a lot. So the way consumers are interacting with business is changing and digitizing and becoming very almost inhumane is the right word. You're now on your banking app and you click a button. You're not, the call center is not even phoning you anymore. And probably 50% of the time you're not really speaking to a person either. You're actually talking to a robot. Secondly, of course, the way that customers work now, COVID, of course, has accelerated that significantly. We do believe hybrid working is here to stay, although I personally went back to the office as soon as I could, because having 3 kids under 11 stuck at home is a bit of a living nightmare. And then, of course, the way you run your operation. So just, sort of briefly, that's what we see as digital transformation. That's just a little bit about the business. I've already taken you through that. So this is an important slide. I mean, it's obviously our sort of marketing slide, but the reason I put that up there, and it comes back to the point about being digitally native. And Didier, you made some remarks about 13 megabytes to the home, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It is all about the technology infrastructure that you've got available. This is our technology infrastructure. But what I just want to point out here is a couple of things. As you know, subsea cable capacity. So technology infrastructure is all about capacity, right? So it's about data center capacity, and it's about connectivity. And the connectivity, we get our connectivity through through the subsea cables. And then, of course, we get our internet connectivity through NAP1, NAP2, et cetera, which is the local internet POPs in South Africa, hosted in our data centers. I thought I'd put that out there. And so Africa is hungry for technology like you've never seen before. I don't know if you guys have seen the race for data centers in Africa. I mean, it is incredible. You know, it's difficult to always understand what are the right estimates, but our estimates are that data center capacity demand probably outweighs supply 10 times on the African continent. Because, and this is a very interesting point that you made, and the reason why our global CEO is so keen on South Africa now, he's on Africa, South Africa as well. He was a lead partner for technology for McKinsey in North America for 20 years. And some of you might have read the, very famous article written by McKinsey called The Lions of Africa. People, still reference that. People still reference that article. And what we believe is that because a lot of African countries, because, as you know, in tech, you've always got this problem of greenfields versus brownfields, and developed companies and countries sitting with what we call legacy, technical debt. Africa, in many countries, doesn't have that infrastructure. So your ability to actually leapfrog using digitization and the ability of African businesses to leapfrog, is a really, really great opportunity for the African businesses and, of course, for technology businesses. Just a little bit of a heads up about, we also have a very big presence. Our European business is our second biggest business. Just a bit of a indication, and the European Union, for intersake, is one of our biggest clients. Oh, sorry, Didier, I have to just thought I would get that in there. So it's the third largest of our operations in Europe is in Belgium. So that's when I go to London end of the month, I should make sure I get an invite by my Belgium colleague. I'm not going to bore you with that. So what's really, really good, and I want to get onto particularly the challenges, the opportunities. So I think I've spoken about some of the opportunities, but I particularly want to talk about also the challenges and the realities of doing business in Africa. So what's really amazing is that the African market and the Middle East market is growing. It's the fastest growing IT services market globally. So because of that digital hungriness, the digital nativeness, and the ability to leapfrog technology. So it's the fastest growing market. Look, a lot of that is also driven, I don't know how much you know about Saudi Arabia and the Crown Prince's Vision 2030. When you start spending $1 trillion on investments, that'll give you a lot of growth. So as you can see there, that is some of the growth rates that we're seeing across the continent. And this is now really focused. This was an internal presentation. So it's really focused on, the countries in which we operate, but outside of Nigeria and Egypt, I mean, those are the major markets on the continent in any case. So financial services and public sector. I don't know about your customer base. I looked at your website. It looks like financial services is quite a big customer of Andile services. I think for most tech companies, financial services will always be one of your biggest sectors because they are very tech intensive. Public sector, certainly from our perspective, public sector is probably about 30% of our business. No, about 25% of our business in South Africa, and retail and healthcare really growing massively. We're actually doing. I saw the pilot now when I was in Abu Dhabi in the Reem Mall. Really amazing stuff around digitization. You talk about how you interact with your customers these days. So I was going to make a sexist comment, but I must be careful now because I was going to say every woman's dream. The mall has an app because the mall, and this is the mall, right? Not the tenants. They want to monetize this, where the app, it geolocates you, it'll push specials to you, and the app kind of does within the mall what Amazon.com does for you. We actually used some APIs with Amazon.com where it tracks your behavior, like Amazon does. So the next time you go to the mall, or it'll even push a notification to you at home saying, those, Starbucks, the pumpkin spice latte, it's October again, it's available, and you can even order the pumpkin spice latte. It'll pick up automatically as you walk into the mall. So retail, a big growing sector. So very interesting. I think these slides are actually, I'm not going to take you too much through these slides because I want to get to, I don't want to get to the thank you. That's a little bit, that would be ahead of my time. Just want to go one back. There we go. So very interesting, and we briefly touch on it. So obviously in technology, we're a business we are a B2B business, and Africa, no doubt, is a massive opportunity. It's a massive opportunity because of the consumer growth. You know, people like Unilever. One of my best friends is the country manager for Ethiopia, and I asked him why he took the job, and he said, "Well, it's one of Unilever's CEO's top 5 focuses globally. You know, just because of the massive population and the consumer growth, but that doesn't always translate into B2B business. So what I've found is that a lot of service companies go into Africa on the back of that promise, and the reason, simplistically, why it doesn't translate into business is certainly businesses of our scale. You know, you need to deal with the head office of a large enterprise that is making decisions and that has the purchasing power. The challenge on the African continent, in fact, I read that Fortune 500, you know, the Fortune 500 companies issue actually on my way to PE the other day. There's only one Fortune 500 company headquartered in Africa. And it can be quite challenging also doing business with the local companies, and I'll take you through some of that. So that statement there, doing business in Africa is successful only when you do so with your eyes wide open. So first and foremost, to be clear, you can absolutely do successful business in Africa or north of South Africa, because I think when people talk about Africa, they almost imply north of South Africa. It's almost like they kind of exclude South Africa from Africa, which is not fair, because you've probably all felt it. Let me tell you, it's more trying for us doing business in South Africa over the last 3-4 years, quite frankly, than it has been doing business in Kenya, as an example, because of some of the challenges we've had with state capture, tenderpreneurism, some of the failures, quite frankly, of some of the government departments that we deal with. So you really just have to go with your eyes open, and you really just need to understand what those risks are. And I would say that those risks are really twofold, and we'll talk a little bit about how to manage that. I mean, Carla spoke about IP laws. Of course, in any country, you've got to consider political risk, and you've got to consider legal risk. So the first thing you need is political stability, which in a lot of African countries, and by the way, that's not different, right? Whether you're in Europe, whether you're in Africa, whether you're in the US, it's all the same. I mean, what companies look for is protection of its property rights and its intellectual property rights. And if the law of contract, and we had an anecdotal story about my experience in Nigeria, they have a healthy disregard for the law of contract in Nigeria. Now, you can't do business if the law of contract and your property rights are not, if you can't, and that's where South Africa, by and large, is still very good. We do have an independent judiciary still, and you can go to the courts if somebody has acted either unethically or has contravened your contractual relationship, and you can mitigate that in a reasonably quick space of time. So that's very important. Country risk is a very, very important thing. As an example, I've been on WhatsApp since about when did the coup happen in Khartoum? We've got 3 staff members currently stuck in a hotel in Khartoum. They're petrified. They can't get out of the country. The airports have been shut down. I mean, we've got one of our internet. You get this risk insurance. We've got we've got a guy that's he can't even get into the country. So can you imagine sitting in a place like Khartoum? You just hear gunshots in the streets. The airports have been shut down. I mean, my first response, now, because we don't have a business in Khartoum, my first response was I shouted at the divisional MD. I said, "What the heck are you doing, sending people to Khartoum to begin with?" So you really got to be mindful of the country risk, and that's political risk. That's risk of violence, terrorism. If you look at what's happening in parts of Ethiopia, I mean, Mozambique, and so forth and so forth. But if you understand those things, and of course the last thing, and I don't know if it's on this slide. So sorry, that second point is also very, very important. And I think I kind of touched on it again, and anecdotally, right? And I say this tongue in cheek. I don't mean it seriously. I keep on having to remind my colleagues in Tokyo that Africa is not a country; it's a continent. No, it's a problem, guys. It's a continent. It's not it's not a country. You know, I literally had, and look, I can't pretend to speak intelligently about Japan either. You know, so that's why I say it. That's why I say it tongue in cheek. But I literally had the old chestnut on Tuesday morning when I was dealing with one of my Japanese colleagues, and he was referring to somebody in Nairobi and wanted to know if I don't maybe know him. Well, it's a way away from here, but you know, I do business there, so there's a chance that I might know it. It really isn't. I mean, the legislative environment and really the solution sometimes needs to be tailored and differentiated in different markets. You know, same as within the Middle East, for example. They want to know nothing about cloud computing, or certainly not public cloud computing as an example, not because of GDPR or data sovereignty, but I mean, security. I mean, the Minister of Cybersecurity in Saudi Arabia is simply not going to run his intelligence capabilities on an American cloud platform. It's just not going to happen. So you have to understand those. So you have to understand those things. And the last thing, of course, is culture. Big lesson for me. A big lesson. My first ever board meeting when we still had a business in Nigeria, and it was on video. It was the good old days, video conference before Teams, and it was on video conference. And our company secretary is a Nigerian lady, so some of them were in Nigeria, some of us were in South Africa. And I made a couple of comments, and one stage the company secretary said, "Ladies and gentlemen, sorry, I'm really sorry. That gentleman with a horrific accent in South Africa," I shouldn't say horrific accent. I cannot understand the word he's saying. So you know, we have to understand that. We must understand that, you know, you're listening to the Japanese guy trying to understand him. He doesn't understand you either, right? So you have to understand culture. You've got to be careful. I've really learned that, and it's not about being politically correct, but you know, you can't butt and ask guys about the Springboks as a opener, as a table opener, depending on which country you are. You know, so you've got to really understand. So one of my habits, and it's been like really incredible privilege for me over the last kind of 6 years as I've started to travel a lot. Like I knew absolutely nothing about Saudi Arabia. I honestly couldn't find it on a map before I went there. But what I do is every time I go to a country, I read a book about, you know, to pass the time on the plane and kind of educate yourself about that. So those are the things, that the opportunities, in particular opportunities in technology and the opportunity in B2B. In fact, the newspaper article when I was appointed and we announced that we would be integrating into NTT Limited, quoted my boss as saying NTT intends to double down in Africa. So there absolutely is significant opportunity in Africa. You just got to keep your eyes wide open, understand the country risk. So if you look at the countries that we are in on that country map, and I know I've flashed past it because honestly, no one likes PowerPoint. Certainly I don't. It's like the worst thing being in the technology industry. I don't know if other industries do it, but it's like PowerPoint is like a core competence, the amount of PowerPoint that we have to sit through. We specifically selected those countries, and we specifically exited countries because we found that we simply could not do business there anymore. And most of the ones that we exited, which was Algeria and Nigeria, we exited Ghana. Ghana is a great country, but we had to service it from Nigeria. The economy is too small to create scale. So unfortunately, when we exited Nigeria, we had to exit Ghana as well. And the number one reason is not so much political risk, but it's legal risk. It's because, as I said, the law of contact is not upheld, and particularly there's a culture of non-payment, and that's a problem. I mean, when you're a business and you start going into an average of 360 debtors days, you've got a real problem. So going to Africa with your eyes open, there is absolute opportunity. I mean, we are still in 11 countries in Africa, including South Africa, which is an African country. And we generate 11 billion of our 14 billion in those countries. They are cash positive businesses. I mean, besides one, there's only one country that we even run on an overdraft. So you can absolutely do good business in Africa. But keep your eyes open. Educate yourself a little bit. You don't have to become an expert, but just educate yourself a little. Use the experts when it comes to the legal stuff. I mean, taxation also is a big challenge. But if you do that, and the biggest thing I would say is to decide, because you know the legal stuff is the easy part, right? I mean, you know, you get a lawyer, you know, people like Carla, very competent people that understand this. The culture side, I think, is a side that I would really impress upon you. And don't pretend to be somebody that you're not. But I think it goes a really, really long way if you are prepared to immerse yourself in the culture, which sometimes means a little bit out of your comfort zone. It does occasionally mean eating something that, if you want to be really entertained, I'll show you the pictures of the goat braai I went to in Riyadh. As an Afrikaner, I get quite excited when I get invited to a braai, and then I realize, now hang on a second, there's a big difference between their braais and ours, and you can't say no. I mean, it really is. It is an insult, right? You can't say no. You have to understand those kind of things. Every now and again, you get into a car and you're driving on a road to, say, Nakuru in Kenya, which is a bit of a death-defying experience. I mean, they do potholes better than we do. I know, I'm done. All right, so I hope that made a little bit of sense. I tried to, as I said, veer away from the PowerPoint because you can always get the PowerPoint later. But thanks for listening, and I hope you've maybe learned or taken away something today. I certainly did when I listened to Carla. Thank you.
I can listen to him for a long time. One quick story. My company name is Andile, and Dimension Data has a very long history of working with entrepreneurs. And many of you know that if you travel into Africa, it really is expensive, into north of the border Africa. So if you go to Nigeria, it's very easy to look at a hotel cost of $300 a night. Very simple, $400 on Victoria Island. And so we don't, as entrepreneurs, that's not how we roll, So we're always looking for another option. And but I was in conversation with who used to be the chairman of Data Middle East and Africa, a gentleman by the name of Dr. Andile in Kapp. He's a good friend of mine. And Andile and we were chatting, and I said to him, look, I'm going to Nigeria. You guys have an office there. Is it possible for me to just pop in and you sort of use some of the facilities? He said, yeah, absolutely fine. And he sent an email to the Dimension Data office in Nigeria. Of course, I arrive at the airport, and I had no idea. I was picked up by a limousine. I had full security detail because Dimension Data in Nigeria thought that Andile and Kapp was coming. That was my best trip ever into Africa. So thank you for that. That probably hit your P&L somewhere. Yeah, I don't care. Anyway. Working and building a life in Africa is really fun, and it's worth it. And the stories we can tell makes it absolutely worthwhile. So our next speaker is not in Africa. He's at the moment finding himself in Palo Alto on the west coast of the States. And I'm just finding his, so Wim Sohier is the Science and Technology Counselor. He's based in Silicon Valley. He was appointed in 2014 by Flanders Investment and Trade to stimulate strategic relations with the Americas. In addition to ramping up and heading the economic diplomatic representation on Sandy Hill Road in Palo Alto, his specific focus area include information technology, semiconductors, and aerospace, and maybe sometime soon he will move to Texas because it seems like that industry is moving to Texas quite quickly. He has an electronics engineering degree from the University of Belgium and worked before example, at IMEC, the research facility at the University of Leuven, where he established businesses in Taiwan. So obviously he will be joining us on Zoom, and I switch over to Wim. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brink, for the kind introduction. Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador. I think you have a career ahead of you in the technology sector as well. I hope one day you'll represent Belgium here on the West Coast. Thank you, Luc, for involving me in this session today. So I prepared a few slides. If you allow me, I'll share my screen and I'll keep it brief, especially if Mr. Kapp doesn't like the PowerPoint engineers, like he just mentioned. But I do feel the need to say a few words and a few slides on the marketing side on Flanders, and more in specific on the many strengths and success cases that we have in IT. So if you allow me, I'll start sharing my screen. Just a second. So that being said, I would like to start with some recent press coverage that you might have read or not have read about Belgium in the last year, in the almost post-corona times. Belgium made the press on a global scale, and it was not because of political news coming out of Europe or Brussels. No, it was about technological news. And two of the key global challenges at the moment in technology is the shortage of semiconductors and the shortage of vaccines. And I'm very happy, I'm very proud, together with my colleagues, that we play a key role in providing solutions to that challenge. So on the one hand, if you look at the shortage in vaccines, the place in the world where the biggest contract was awarded to produce the most vaccines was Belgium. We have the Pfizer factory in Belgium that covers a lot of the European needs. And secondly, the shortage of semiconductors. You know, this is a very hot domain at the moment where the shortage is really felt in all industries, especially in the automotive industries. There as well, there is increased interest from around the world in some of the work that our Flemish companies and our researchers are doing. So that's what you see on the screen, two screenshots of press releases, the one on semiconductors on the left and the one on the vaccines on the right. And I'll come back to the left one a little bit later, because I would like to go into more detail about our competences in semiconductors as well. But a third press release I would like to mention is bringing it closer to home for you, closer to South Africa. And that is a press release from a year ago from a company called Simera Sense that announced its expansion in Europe. And guess what? They chose Flanders as a place to set up a new office. They're a very, very high-tech company. Probably most of you have heard of them. And we're very happy that we can share this today as one of the recent investment cases resulting out of South Africa in Flanders. So with this context, with these three press releases, I would like to continue a little bit on keeping it high level and go into a timeline of some of the accomplishments in IT technology that resulted out of Belgium. And it's very difficult sometimes to raise above our reputation in chocolates and beers and in our reputation of being a diplomatic capital of the world. But when you look at it behind the scenes and you start digging into the details of what resulted out of Belgium, there are a number of accomplishments, and I listed 7 of them. Beginning in the 1990s, because I don't want to make it a history lesson before that, and going all the way till today. So the first one of these 7 accomplishments, I would like to ask the question to the audience. I don't have the view of the audience, but my question will be the following. Which one of you has ever heard of Tim Berners-Lee? Please raise your hand. Tim Berners-Lee, anybody? Well, I'm hoping that at least half of the audience is raising their hands right now. He's one of the key foundation people behind the internet. But what I'm getting at is one of his closest colleagues that actually co-authored his paper was a Belgian guy by the name of Robert Caillot. And Robert was a close researcher together with Tim Berners-Lee that laid the foundation of the internet as we know it today. And they did that based out of CERN in Switzerland. And that Belgian, Robert, was actually the one who wrote and coded the first web browser. So taking that as an anchor point, as a first accomplishment by a Flemish engineer, if we move to the end of the 90s, where at the time, I guess, several tens of millions of people had access to the internet, which is nothing compared to today, but tens of millions. It was before the democratization of the internet. There was a key development being done in Antwerp, in the north of Belgium, where they worked on a new type of modem. And that new type of modem was a highly integrated ADSL USB modem. So using the latest chip technology, they made a product that made it affordable for everybody to have a modem in their home. So that really meant the start of evolving from only tens of millions of people with internet at home to billions of people. And that was done in Antwerp. At the time, it was called Alcatel-Lucent Bell Labs, and now it is called Nokia Bell Labs. You might have seen, it's a specific style of modem which had the shape of a stingray. A stingray, really like a stingray shape, and one of the first key customers was British Telecom, who actually triggered it to become a global success. So if you meet famous entrepreneurs or famous corporate executives in Belgium, there's a good percentage of them, 10%, that actually started their career in Alcatel-Lucent Bell Labs in Antwerp. So moving to the 2000s, as I call it, I would like to give another example, a third one, which is actually coming from the academic world. If you have your iPhone in your pocket and if you're using it all the time, if it's by any means a safe way to communicate, it's because of an encryption standard that was developed in Belgium. And that standard is called the Advanced Encryption Standard. And there were two academics, Mr. Rijmen and Mr. Dahlen, who developed this algorithm, and then they submitted it to the US, to the NIST organization, which is in charge of standards, and they actually won a competition with that, which meant that this algorithm resulted now inside your phones, inside your computers, in any way you communicate today. There is a Belgian encryption standard that it's making secure and that is making it safe for us all to communicate. So that is a third one. And now I would like to make it closer to the modern age. And if you use your GPS in your car or you use Google Maps, there are only two companies in the world that make accurate digital maps. One is called Navtec and the other one is called Teleatlas. And Teleatlas is headquartered in Belgium, in Ghent. And in 2008, they had a major deal with Google. And actually that meant the start of a product that is now named Google Maps. So if you plan your route next time with your TomTom GPS or with your Google Maps device, please think of Flanders because there are so many engineers that made it happen. The company Teleatlas is nowadays not existing anymore because it was acquired for $2.8 billion by the Dutch company TomTom, the GPS maker. So that's a fourth example of an accomplishment that makes us proud. There are many more, even in social media. The European predecessor of Facebook was Netlog, that resulted out of Belgium. There is a very popular content management system named Drupal, which is used by 15% of the websites worldwide. That is also resulting out of Belgium. And I think last month, a Belgian company had the happy announcement that they made 100,000 digital cinema projectors until now. So also next time when you go to the movie theater and you're watching the latest James Bond movie within a very recent theater setting with a laser projector behind you, the chances are very high that's a Belgian projector you're looking at. So that being said, I hope I surprised some of you with these accomplishments. We should do better effort in promoting our capabilities in Belgium, in Flanders, in high tech. And that is one of the jobs I have. And also the region of Flanders in general, after the last hectic 2 years, we came to the conclusion that we need to put more priority on that. So in my specific role as a technology attaché, we now have 10 people worldwide doing nothing but promoting our technology competences worldwide. And I'm certain that my colleague Luc Fabry, who is in the audience at the moment, would love to see one of these technology attachés also covering South Africa. So we're both working on that, but until now, the closest one for South Africa is in Paris, covering South Africa. So that being said, I'm moving on, and I would like to catch up on some of the things, the opening statement of the ambassador, where he really emphasized our strengths in SMEs that grow to global companies. And that is what my next point is about. In Belgium, in Flanders, we have lots of investors, large-scale investors. Some of them are foreign, some of them are local. But that is what you see on this screen. All the gray logos are big companies that invest heavily in Belgium. Some of them are local, like Agfa. Agfa is a globally known brand that is also headquartered in Flanders. And others are, for example, Intel from the US or Microsoft that have a significant presence in Belgium. So if I overlay this slide with some of the SMEs and the spin-offs that we have in Belgium, sorry, that was the wrong button, overlay this slide with some of the spin-offs that we have in Belgium, you come to the following view. In yellow, you see some of these young companies that are fastly growing organically, and in gray, you see these big corporations. And I think to concur with Ambassador Versfeld, in the dynamics between the SMEs and the dynamics between the big companies and the SMEs, that's really where our strength lies in Flanders. You have close contact to all levels. You have close and an open culture to do business, which makes it very innovative. So I myself, I worked for a couple of these bigger ones and also some of the smaller ones. And there is actually a revolving door between the two of them. The communication lines are very close, and that is really one of our strengths that we have in Flanders. So if I can ask you to take one thing away with you today, is please remember that if you're a big corporation like Mr. Kapp, Dimension Data, or if you're a fast-growing young company, both of them have their place in Belgium, and they really enjoy our market, our open and innovative business culture. So not only do I do a shout out and a sign of appreciation to Dimension Data and the 450 employees they have in Belgium, but also to Chimera Sense, who recently started their office in Leuven. So Leuven is the city you see here in the center of the slide. It's an outgrown university city. And if I take another city, for example, Ghent, on the left side of the slide, the distance between Ghent and Leuven is corresponding to the distance between Johannesburg and Pretoria, for example. So that's more or less the same distance you see here. I'm not saying anything about traffic jams and getting there by car, which is probably the same in Johannesburg, but the distance at least is the same. So that being said, moving on. One of the previous speakers, I think it was Mr. Brink himself that mentioned or Mr. Kapp, sorry, Mr. Kapp himself that mentioned the hunger for more infrastructure in Africa. So in Flanders, we have the luxury to have this focus already for 40 years now. So I think in early the 1980s, our Flemish government decided that we needed to invest heavily in semiconductor infrastructure. So this is one of the strengths that we have. And I plotted on this map some of the clean rooms that we have. The ones in yellow are open for everybody to use, also for South African entrepreneurs. And the ones in green that I plotted are those of big corporations that use them for their own purpose. So besides those semiconductor clean rooms, we also have a very high quality of broadband and fiber network. We have over 70 data centers just in Belgium alone, representing more than 30 megawatts of data center capability. And these open clean rooms, so just the yellow clean rooms, the three you see on the slide, they represent 16,500 square meters of clean room surface. So that is really a huge amount if you know how expensive it is to build a clean room, and that really attracts a lot of the corporations from around the world. So for example, the main clean room that is used in this open innovation fashion is the one from IMEC, and companies like Intel, Samsung, ASML, all the major companies active in semiconductors worldwide, they actually sent engineers there and they worked together on the latest technologies, which is 10 years or 15 years ahead of the market. It's what IMEC calls pre-competitive research, and the organization IMEC is really good at that. And at the moment, IMEC, together with a company like ASML, is really considered a crown jewel in Europe when it comes down to semiconductors. So the reason why the Flemish government put a high emphasis on semiconductor technologies in the 1980s is exactly because of the spillover effects it has on our ecosystem and it has on foreign investors. So you're very welcome if you're on the hardware side of innovation to use these facilities together with the researchers active from more than 100 nationalities at IMEC. But there are also other clean rooms that are open. For example, there is one on the left side of Brussels by the Free University of Brussels. They have a dedicated one to photonics. And then there is another one in the University of Ghent, which is also an IMEC facility that is dedicated more to photonics and medical devices. So these three facilities are open for everybody to use in either a project-based way, doing research together, or on a commercial basis as well, doing dedicated product development for your company. So good to mention there, IMEC is focusing on digital and nanotechnology, but we also have three other research organizations. One is focusing on biotech, another one on renewable energy, and then a fourth one is focusing on robotics. Now, there are many IT entrepreneurs in the audience, and so many people have different interpretations from IT or ICT. But if I try to simplify it for a non-IT audience, I like to use this slide where I say, look, if you look at ICT, at the moment, there are 7 areas where you can segment them into. There's cloud computing, there's software, there's hardware, there are digital transactions, there is communication technology, there is data, and there is internet access. So these are core components of what in total is considered ICT. And the reason why I want to make this breakdown is to give you one key corporate reference that has invested in Belgium for each of these segments. So I don't know how many of the audience stores their data with Google in the cloud, but I always like to say that part of the Google Cloud in Europe is based in Belgium. They have a key data center, one of 5 for the EMEA market is based in Belgium. And they have been expanding it every couple of years, where the total investment is now something like $1.6 billion US. So that Google data center based in Belgium is also using the latest in energy technologies and the latest in cooling technologies. So that is one key corporate reference for cloud computing. When I move to software, there are 450 people for Microsoft working out of Belgium. And the image you see there is their newest office at the airport of Brussels, where they have a team focusing on everything IoT. So Mr. Kapp will like to hear this, 450 people. So Dimension Data is more or less the same size as Microsoft in Belgium. That's a great benchmark to have. And I would like to challenge Dimension Data to grow that presence, because the largest American presence we have in Belgium would, in technology at least, would be something like 5,500 people working for Johnson & Johnson in the north of Belgium. Moving on to the third domain, if you look at hardware, there is a regional headquarters of AMD based in Belgium in the city of Aalst. And if you move to digital transactions, one key reference that we have is that the European headquarters of Euroclear is based out of Brussels. And Euroclear, for those of you that are not familiar with the banking world, they take care of all the interbanking traffic. So a lot of the payments between banks and the communication between banks flows through Brussels. Also on the internet access side, I already mentioned Nokia Bell Labs. On the digital data side, we have a large presence of Cisco. It's more than 1,000 people, of which 50% are R&D profiles. And on the last side, on the communications technology, I would like to mention our national incumbent operator called Proximus. It used to be called Belgacom. And that is interesting to pause there, because Belgacom, now called Proximus, used to have an international carrier division that is now called BICS, and that is a link that they have with South Africa. So your local operator, MTM, if I'm correct, they used to own 20% of that inter-carrier system, and they recently sold that back to Belgium's Proximus. So I can say without exaggerating that we are deeply connected, South Africa and Belgium. And when I say that, I don't say that in a diplomatic term like the ambassador would do, but I say that in a technical term through the submarine cables and through this inter-carrier network that we have. It was mentioned before, we are an ideal test market, not only for clothing, but also for IT. And what you see on the left is Bill Gates and our digital ID card. Belgium was one of the first countries in the world to use digital IDs with a chip with biometric data on it, and the same with the passport. So at the time, I think it's almost 20 years ago, Mr. Bill Gates personally came to Belgium to launch it, and it was supported by Microsoft. So when we say that we are an ideal test market, please remember that even the government sometimes can be an early adopter of technology. So some other facts and figures there. Since last summer, we are officially an innovation leader in Europe. So if you look at the European Union, they have a scoreboard. It's called the Innovation Scoreboard. And we used to be a quick follower, but since this summer, after Corona, we are officially in the lead in Europe with a select few of countries that can call themselves innovation leader. So it shows you that on technology, we're really on a growing trajectory, and it's the right time to consider Belgium. In Flanders, specifically in the north of Belgium, we have 250,000 IT professionals, and we spend 3.35% of our GDP on R&D. And that is really an impressive percentage, because the European average is 2.1. And Belgium, Flanders is leading there as well in Europe in terms of spending money on R&D. There is only one country in Europe that is spending more than 3.35%, but it's very cold there in winter, so I don't feel the need to mention them today. So that being said, please remember our test market strengths. We're open, we're early adopters of new technology. You know that we speak 3 official languages, or at least we try to, and that on top of that, we learn our English as well, not only from television, but also in high school. Our talent is versatile and flexible, and you can actually start with a small office and then make that office grow into your office to support the entire European markets. And if we're honest, and yeah, one strength that we have is specifically in B2B. And if we're honest, in Belgium, you don't see too many companies that have good consumer products. So I think you should remember Belgium and Flanders as the place to be to do R&D or to set up a sales and marketing office that is catering to B2B markets. So that's the first part. I'm just going to mention some companies that grew from small to big based out of Flanders and that were able to scale globally. The first company is a company called Softkinetic. They made middleware, so software, and they made a sensor that was able to sense depth. And that young company was very successful to the extent that they were acquired by Sony. And right now you can find that Belgian know-how into the device that is called a PlayStation. So if you have an Xbox at home, you probably know Xbox Kinect. Well, PlayStation has also a VR capability, and there inside the camera, you'll find Belgian know-how. The banking, I already covered it. We have every major bank present in Belgium. The healthiest bank in Europe at the moment is KBC, that is a Belgian bank headquartered in Leuven. There are more than 270 banks and financial organizations, and they employ more than 100,000 FTE in Belgium. Another example, now we're moving into the space domain. You can find Flemish know-how on Mars at the moment. if you're a space enthusiast, you probably noticed in February there was this Mars rover that landed. Well, this Mars rover, they have several chips on board that were designed in Belgium. And the two main image sensor chips on this rover were developed in Belgium by a company called Simosis and by an American company, their local team in Belgium called ON Semiconductor. So that is really a very appreciated success story. And that engineering team of Simosis is now owned by an Austrian company called Austrian Microsystems. So besides essential cameras for the engineering robot and besides essential cameras for the landing, so before the rover was actually dropped on Mars, there was a Belgian camera looking down on the surface to correlate the pictures of the surface with the data from the map. Those were two Belgian contributions to this successful mission. And there was actually a third one. There was a Belgian company that made the parachute for this rover to be able to land on Mars. So very happy to be part of that success outside the world. We have a nice company called Melexis. Melexis makes especially automotive sensors very well. And if you buy a new car at the moment, then on average, there are 13 Flemish sensors in your car resulting out of this one single company called Melexis. They have companies like Tesla, like BMW, and I think in 2020, they sold more than 1.3 billion chips in 1 year. Now, coming to the end of what I'm trying to promote here, Belgium is the right place for you to consider. And despite all the infrastructure and the good bandwidth and a nice office location with a view, you all know it comes down to finding the right talent. And there as well, I would like to give one example. One of the co-founders of an application called Shazam was a Belgian guy, Philip Engelbrecht. So that is just a small example to show that we do have the IT talent. It's probably under the radar for you, just like it is for most people around the world. But we invite you to stop over in Belgium next time you have a trip in Europe, so that we can make sure that you get an update on what is interesting for your company. And we do that with custom-made visitor programs for you. So to summarize, we have some tradition, we have an open, innovative business culture, great infrastructure, key corporate references you can work with, an ideal test market to enter the EU and scale afterwards, and we have proven success. You can find Flanders in your pocket, you can find Flanders on Mars, you can find Flanders in your car, on your driveway, you can find Flanders probably in your kitchen as well. So we do have the tradition, we do have the know-how and the talent. So please, we invite you to leverage that and ask your local office of Flanders Investment and Trade, headed by Luc Fabry, to make custom feedback for you about your company and about your target markets. We would be very happy to do so. And to finalize, I'm taking you on a helicopter trip above Flanders. This is a science park near the city of Ghent. A lot of biotech companies are based there. This is the facility of IMEC in Leuven, where the whole world knocks on the door nowadays to be able to visit and to work together. And this is a third location, which is more on the east side of Belgium. And that looks like a Google campus, but it's not. It's actually a former Philips campus, where a lot of the IT companies actually set up their first office. So that being said, I would like to close here. Luc Fabry is my local colleague. He's in the audience. Please make sure to involve him in your plans. We can make comparisons for you as well with other European markets and locations. And to say it with the words of Mr. Brink, Europe has its own challenges, but our agency exists to take those challenges away for you. Thank you so much for your time.
easy to set up a company in Belgium, just like it is here in South Africa. The only issue is, first of all, what are you going to do, a branch or a subsidiary? So 99% of the companies in South Africa set up a subsidiary. The reason why is if you set up a branch in South Africa, you have to also give all the information from South Africa to the Belgian authorities on your annual reports, which nobody wants to do. Secondly, you have to translate everything in Dutch or in French, which nobody wants to do too. So that's why I say set it up as a subsidiary. It's much easier and it's also legally much faster. So what you have to do is very easy to set up a company. You basically have to set up, make the articles of incorporation. It has to be in Dutch. You have to transfer the money. You go to a lawyer or a notary, which is like a legal representative of the government. Once the money is on the account, they will register it. It comes in the National Gazette, and then you just have to ask for a number of information on VAT, Social Security, and all that. Now, what is the trick here for South Africa? Bringing money out of South Africa to Belgium, you have currency controls. If you do it from your personal account to Belgium, you're limited to 1 million rand, as you may know. If you bring it over from a subsidiary, you only can bring in 10 million rand. So of course, large corporations, they have to ask authorization of the government here, the National Reserve here. But the most important thing is, if you have a private company here in South Africa, which is considered as your own property, you cannot transfer more than 50,000, 1 million rand to Europe. That is the biggest issue that you have when you're going to set up. I just want to tell you, if you do that, okay, you can do it, but you need to have authorization from the National Reserve, and it takes much more time. So my advice is, if you want to set up a company, set it up as a subsidiary of your company that you have here. It makes it also much easier if you want to apply for visa, which I also can explain later. So that's the most important, but it's the setup of the company is very easy. It takes you 1 week, 2 weeks. The last thing that is also important to know is you need to translate your articles of incorporation into Dutch or French. And it's good to know what you're going to do in the company and what you're going to do in Europe, because every time you change your reason of business, you have to go back to your notary, and it takes time and it's annoying. So basically, think about your business plan before, then set up your company. So that's a little bit the feedback for setting up. There are a number of companies that are set up, and I also have some testimonial on that, but these are the big companies that are in Belgium. SAP, the Chimera Sense is brand new. It's just a satellite, a company makes nano satellites. They chose Leuven because they want to develop also chips for their nano satellites into the market. And then the other ones are also important to know. Maybe also to know, okay, what can you expect? What's in for me when you set up in Belgium? And I give you very briefly the incentives that you have. But for Belgium, for Flanders, it's basically divided between the Flanders, the northern part, and the Wallonia part. Each has their own way of giving cash grants. In Flanders, you can get cash grants up to 1 million euros. It's mostly for training, or it is for setting up your company, but it's maximum 20%, but it goes very quickly. And it has to be also relevant for a business. It has to have some innovative, it has also to prove that it is relevant also for the Flemish region. The other ones are more on the ecological side, which is not that relevant for IT companies. Most important is the IT, is innovation and research incentives. 50% for IT, for fundamental, 60% for fundamental research, and 25% is normally for operational development. But yeah, for small and medium-sized companies, it's 50 to 60%. The trick about this is maybe also to know, this is what Europe considers small and medium-sized companies. And I don't know how you look at it, but if you, for instance, are a large company in South Africa, you have more than 25% of the company that's going to set up in Europe, you're going to be considered by European law also as large corporation. That's also very important. It's not because you're going to set up a small company in Europe that you're going to be considered a small company in Belgium. That's also important to know. And that's European regulations, the same for everybody. So this gives you an idea of the information. For our R&D support, that's basically the rules that we have normally. But I must say we have a huge budget in research and development. That's also why we are 3.25% of our GDP. is because we are subsidizing massively all kind of innovative projects in Flanders. That's thanks to the Flemish government. And we talk about 50 million euros a year that we sponsor small, medium-sized companies in innovation. So if you set up in Belgium, automatically you have the same rights as a Belgian company. That is the big advantage, of course. So if you want to have more overview, it's here. You have also taxation benefits. So we are at the lower end of the taxation. We used to have 35%, we are 25 now, and it's only 20% for SMEs. You have a number of deductions. I'm not going to go over it, but it's definitely true that whatever your tax rate is, you will never pay the maximum tax rate. It's almost impossible in Belgium to pay the maximum tax rate because of all the deductions that you can have. We have also tax rulings. Most important for this is that you need to do that when you have intercompany transfer. Like if you talk about IP transfers, you need to go to the Belgian authorities. You give them also the same information to show that you are at arm's length working. And then you will have also a commitment from the government for 5 years, which is something that is also important for IT companies. We have also advantage for expats. They basically don't pay the high taxes that we pay. The Belgian government taxes the citizens a lot, same like in South Africa, but we got a lot of benefits of it too. But expats get a number of deductions also for it, so they will never be at the same rate as Belgians are. Then this consolidation is also important, so you can consolidate your different companies. It will be on the lower tax rate also. And then, whoops, I did something wrong. I think you have to move on because further. Okay. There is a number of tax deductions also for people that are employed. That is also important. So that's also the most important thing for IT companies is that you basically have a tax deduction of 80% for research and development people on your withholding tax, which brings down your social security tax, which is now 25, to about 10-15% contribution for the employer, which is a big advantage, of course, for IT companies. And then there are also a number of free zones for the withholding tax. I try to move on, but I can't. Can you move to the next slide, please? Yeah. Interesting also to know, because I have a lot of companies or people that are interested in setting up a company in Europe, but also move there for a number of years. So I'll give you the basic rules, how it works. Next slide, please. We have two different kind of visa. We have a professional card and we have the single permit card. So the biggest difference is when you set up your company and you own the company in Europe, you need to apply for a professional card. If you're transferred as an employee to the company that you set up, then you receive a single permit card. Now, the way it works is that the visa authorization goes to the regions. We basically decide if it's a valid case that you can also set up your company, that you can live at least for 2 years in Belgium. So you need to have enough capital to do that. And then normally when we give the authorization, the embassy gives also the visa then to work in Belgium. The way it works is you have a temporary visa for 2 years. And after 2 years, we extend it for another 3 years. And after that, you can have a residence permit. You have to prove, of course, that you have been capable of running a business for 5 years. That's how it works, basically. But that's the most important thing for setting up in Belgium. And also, if you want to set up yourself or have the company set up and then bring yourself over for a number of years. With respect to education, the big advantage, of course, you guys speak Afrikaans. Afrikaans and Dutch is very similar. If you would set up in Belgium and you bring your family over, you don't have to go to an international school, which costs about 30 to 40,000 euros a year. You can send them to a Flemish school, and we have special programs for people that are immigrating to Europe, and they have a program 6 months, maximum a year. They call it econ classes. And after a year, your kids can go to the normal schools, and they go in the normal system that is working in Belgium. So that's the way it works. So that's about it. The only thing is, I have some testimonial of 3 companies who set up, and then we can finish with this one.
Is providing insights of 2 companies that have invested recently in South Africa. three companies that chose Flanders as a springboard for the European market?
Similar sense is for Flanders Investment Trade in Johannesburg, the first case where technology will drive our cooperation. I mean, and it's one of the possibilities that I wanted to showcase here in South Africa, that technology has been developed in South Africa and can also be used in Flanders. The objective for me for this company here is to prove that we can do cooperation that is beneficial for the two countries. For South Africa, it will increase their manufacturing base. Flanders can also provide assistance in development on the European market. And it basically is going to be a win-win for both countries. For Flanders, it's going to be technology increase. For South Africa, it's going to be manufacturing and also upgrading and increasing their production facility here.
Hi, Luke.
Hi.
Lovely to see you again.
Good to see you.
Omco is a Belgian company who started an acquisition in South Africa in 2020. Managing Director Fatima Foraji.
The BMT Group, Omco South Africa's ultimate holding company, consists of 4 divisions, namely Omco, BMT Aerospace, VCST and IGW, focusing on the manufacturing of glass molds, gears and gearboxes for the aerospace market, and industrial, automotive and rail gears and gearboxes.
First and foremost, South Africa still remains the third largest economy in Africa as a whole, behind Egypt and Nigeria, and remains the largest industrialized economy in the southern African region. So the country offered us a range of attractive assets for as investors, such as a diverse demography, a diversified, productive and advanced economy in terms of sectoral composition, an abundance of natural resources, a transparent legal system, and a vibrant take on political stability.
Kapp Resolve consults in change management, business management, and business continuous improvement in the SAP arena.
So we won an international award for our supply enablement work for SAP in Barcelona 2 years ago.
Gary and Herman, you have decided to move to Flanders, Belgium. Can you tell me what are your drivers and what can you expect there, you think?
We came upon the Flanders Investment and Trade website, and from that we learned that it's not hard for a foreign company to open a business in Belgium. You are eligible to apply for a special work permit for business owners called a professional card, and also tax benefits, social security benefits. The whole of Flanders is one of the most important logistic hubs in all of Europe.
We decided to invest in Flanders, I think, because we saw Belgium as an opportunity, and it's also a region that is created by the Belgian government that has incentives for smaller businesses and to make it an opportunity for the springboard into the European and to a global market. And the process that we went through has been extremely smooth. With the help of the Flanders Chamber, we've been helped and we've been assisted into the right procedures and to put all those things in place in order to have a successful established business in Belgium today.
World-renowned Belgian-based Lotus Bakeries chose South Africa for production of their fruit-based product lines.
South Africa is very well located for our export market. We export to 30 plus countries around the world, and the geographical location from South Africa allows us to access markets like Australia, the US very quickly and efficiently.
I think that's about it.
Thank you, Luke. If I may ask for the panel to just move to the front. So that would be are we going to have the Zoom attendees also? Are they still on? The two? Could we maybe have them on screen? So we are going to have 3 minutes for questions. We had one question earlier, but may I ask from the audience, are there any other specific questions? I did ask, so I'm expecting one question per delegate. I'm not seeing the hands going up. Nothing? Nothing from this table, again. All right. Maybe just a closing remark from my side, from Sakeliga's perspective. From a Sakeliga view, we absolutely believe in connecting trade, and we could believe in connecting good trade. And that is an international strategy that we are busy with, and this is an example of that. And so, if you have any questions, you are always welcome to reach out to Sakeliga. Most of you are members. If you're not, where have you been? You should join immediately. It is a winning organization that is doing amazing things for entrepreneurs and businesses alike, and playing a crucial role in the furtherment of the economy of our country, which we feel very strongly about. I think that, to me, the thing that stands out is that clearly the new economy is where business is at. You know, Dimension Data is a great example of a South African business rising to international prominence and doing well. But maybe just a point to ponder on. If you have a history of innovation, a history of building things that are important, you needn't look no further than Silicon Valley. And Silicon Valley as a bed for innovation has obviously given rise to the big five in technology. Now, you may or may not like them. I don't particularly have views on that. But the reality is that the big five in tech is market capitalization about twice the size of Africa's complete GDP. I mean, just think about that. Companies that are, on average, about 25 years old are greater than the whole of the African continent right now. What does that mean? It means that positioning yourself and your business close to markets, close to innovation, close to capital, but maintaining true to your vision is how it's done. And from what I've seen today, is Belgium clearly has a rich history of innovation, you know, and that was shown in modern infrastructure, in older infrastructure, in technology. And so that is to be considered, you know, very deeply when you make big decisions as to where you will position the future of not only your business, but of your people, of your world. And so I've been really impressed by the opportunity that provides. Are there any questions out of the audience for our panel who is just about to go to sleep? You are boring. They've given you everything, and you are sitting there. You've eaten, you've listened, and you are not participating. I'm disappointed. No questions. There was one question, so let's answer that one. Pic Leroux, sorry, I'm being facetious. I don't mind. I also want to go home, so we'll go back to business. Pic Leroux asked about this rand hedge. You know, the question around, is it possible for us to use South Africa as a lower cost base to provide services and products into markets such as the European Union, or maybe to elevate our service provision through bases in the European Union, you know, and doing good business like that. I don't know if there's anyone on the panel who'd like to have a go. Mr. Kapp, you look set.
Hello. I think I shouldn't pick up the. I think I speak fairly loudly, so I think. Will you be okay? Is that all right? It's a massive opportunity. It really, really is a massive opportunity. Couple of reasons. Obviously, a very, very skilled base. South Africans are very, very skilled. The second reason is just exchange rate and labor arbitrage. Interestingly enough, oh, there we go. So I'm not speaking loudly. Okay. Despite me joking about the Nigerian lady who couldn't understand my accent, the South African accent is globally considered one of the 3 most neutral accents. For example, we have a call center business, or half of the 12,000 people we employ is in a call center business called Merchants, and about 60% of our revenue is offshore. So our customers are Walmart, Netflix, right? So very, very competitive. I would definitely urge you to look into that. And we, for example, do software development for the IMF and the European Union from South Africa. Yeah, so really, really big opportunity. I mean, if you were to compare, look, you mentioned, I mean, everyone in the audience got a shudder when you spoke about 40,000 euros a year for an international school. So if you were to compare labor rates in whether it's Belgium or Europe or the US compared to South Africa, it's very, very competitive. So I would definitely urge you, particularly if you're in software development, I do think it's a great opportunity. Don't see your business growth just in Africa. You can definitely do business in Europe and the US as well.
Maybe also to give you the reality check, I've been here 2 years now in South Africa. I've had 6 companies now that are going to set up in Belgium. The reason why they set up is indeed also to use the advantages of South Africa and then also use the market of Europe. So that's also why Simera Sense, for instance, why did they come to Belgium? They're going to use the technology. They're going to still keep on building their nano satellites here in South Africa. They're going to use the technology in IMEC to upgrade a number of their applications that they have. But the most important thing is that their sales office and the international sales will go through the office in Europe. They will have the advantage of also, for instance, having all the subsidies from the ESA, European Space Agency. They're going to have the capabilities also because of the market, the largest satellite market is in Luxembourg, which is very close to Belgium, as you may know. And other companies like G Studio is the same thing. I mean, this company has more than 60% of their revenue is in Europe. They work for private schools, for other ones, for different customers there, and they just leave also their revenue in their international office in Europe, which of course avoids the currency exchange problem that you have here, that obviously your government doesn't want to solve, because that's a major issue also. I mean, you cannot keep on having international business, bringing the money here, and then basically not having the capability to send it back out when you need it to. That is the biggest issue also. That's why I say also, if you come to Belgium or on the European market anyhow, you have that advantage that you have free capabilities, or at least you have the choice to do with your money that you made internationally. That's what I would say also for, but yeah, I mean, you have the capabilities here in South Africa. I mean, this is a well-developed country. It's pretty much the same like a European country. I know the market is of course completely different here in Africa, but you use the same capabilities that you have here. You don't have to move everybody. Just use the competences of South Africa and use the market of Europe. It's 460 million people. I mean, it's a no-brainer for a lot of people, and that's also why I have them.
Just one very practical element, it's the same time zone.
Yeah, it is.
That's an absolutely massive point, actually. Yeah, I think we've been winning deals against India all the time because of accent and time zone. It's that simple. So, all right, without further ado then, I will say to everyone who's attended, thank you very much. Please, if you have questions, reach out. You know the organizers. And go out there, do good business, link into profitable centers, centers of excellence, centers of position your business correctly, stay true to Africa, stay here, solve our problems, but expand, be good, be the best that you can be. Thank you very much for attending. And a final word of thanks to all the speakers today, also the speakers dialing in on Zoom. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you for your time. Luke, thank you for organizing, and to the organizers of Sakeliga, thank you all very much.